Good morning, everyone. It's cold outside, but it's nice and warm in here, especially with all these warm smiles. It's great to be together on the Lord's Day to worship God and to study in His Word. We're going to be starting this morning in the book of Lamentations, if you want to open there, as we transition from our study in Till There Was No Remedy, the Waldron book, over into A Remnant Shall Return. Lamentations right after the book of Jeremiah. Got my number in a little confusing for everyone. Lesson 8 is actually lessons 8 and 9. And then the lesson that I handed out this week, we'll get into Daniel, and that's lessons 10 and 11. We're expecting to spend the next 2 weeks, including today, on the book of Daniel. All right, so I apologize, we don't have slides today. I meant to email those over last night when I got done with them, and I forgot to do that. So arrived this morning without the slide deck. But it'll basically just reflect the questions that are on those handouts. So if you don't have a handout and would like one, just raise your hand. Jason can bring one over to you. We're at this turning point between two Waldron books because we're pivoting between two time periods, ending the period of Judah alone and moving into the captivity, and then that captivity quickly turns into the period of return and restoration. And I mentioned turning over to Lamentations, but if you would like to quickly turn over to the last chapter of 2 Chronicles. If you didn't notice, last week's study, we were in the last two chapters of 2 Kings and the last chapter of 2 Chronicles. And you'll notice in 2 Chronicles 36, you have very much of an epilogue of what has transpired in Judah, that God, of course, brought these people out of Egypt on eagle's wings, brought them into the promised land, gave it to them. They asked for a king, and so he gives them one. They asked just for a king, so they get Saul, and he's not a godly king, and then God establishes his king when he appoints David as that Christ-like figure who rules and serves God with his whole heart. But then they quickly turn away from him and have a series of good and bad kings until the nation eventually completely turns away, and God brings on all the curses that he'd said from the days of Moses would come upon them if they don't serve him faithfully. They would be cast out of the land, and they would lose it all. If you're in 2 Chronicles 36, verse 15, it says, "The Lord, the God of their fathers, sent word to them again and again by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they continually mocked the messengers of God, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord arose against his people, until there was no remedy. Therefore he brought up against them the king of the Chaldeans, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion on young man or virgin, old man or infirm. He gave them all into his hand." We'll stop there. That phrase, "until there was no remedy," taken straight out of the scriptures to name Brother Waldron's last book, it holds so much weight, does it not? Where God was looking at his people and trying to do anything and everything to get them to do what's right. And he ran out of options. There was nothing more he could do. And so then comes the punishment. That's where we are when we come to this period where Nebuchadnezzar, of course, finally besieges Jerusalem, breaks through the wall in that 11th year of Zedekiah, and people, some flee, some hunker down and are killed, some faithfully obey Jeremiah by going out to him, or going out to the Babylonians and surrendering. And those are the ones who survive, and it says, as Jeremiah said, they have their life as a booty, but they have nothing else. They have simply their lives. And so we come to the book of Lamentations, and would have loved to spend an entire week on this. I had you also look at 3 captivity psalms. But my question for you is, what emotions are expressed as the captives reflect now on what has happened? And I'm sure there's a lot that you could pull out of the 5 chapters of Lamentations, and some may seem obvious, but any specifics that you noticed as you read Lamentations and maybe those 3 Psalms? Dad?
I would say much sadness, much regret, remorse, being mad at themselves for getting themselves into this situation. But,
Yeah, that's a good list. Any specific verses stand out to you or imagery that struck you?
Then I cried because of despair in chapter 3.
Okay.
I have been afflicted by the rod of his wrath. He has led me and made me walk in darkness and not in light.
Yeah, what's their attitude toward God through this lament?
They didn't listen to Jeremiah.
They certainly didn't listen to Jeremiah. Do you see them blaming God at all through this text? Randy?
In Lamentations chapter 1 and verse 18 says, "The Lord is righteous."
What verse was that?
Verse 18, chapter 1 says, "For I have rebelled against his command.
Right.
Hear now, all peoples, and behold my pain, my burden. My young men have gone into captivity."
Yeah, behold my pain. There certainly is an outcry, a recognition and wanting people to see just how miserable they are as they cry out in pain and suffering. Of course, the description through here of the starvation that's occurring after this 2-year siege, even the cannibalism that they had to resort to, and whether or not, God wanted that for them. But there is this recognition that this is because of their sin and understanding that they brought this upon themselves. And so it's sorrow. You see the loneliness. I try to picture sitting in the city of Jerusalem when just, maybe a couple years before, it's this bustling, busy, lively place. And even that first verse of Lamentations, how lonely sits the city that was full of people. And now it's just silent. She's become like a widow. She's like a princess among the provinces who's become a forced laborer. Notice down in verse 6, chapter 1 and verse 6, all her majesty has departed from the daughter of Zion. It's a place that, of course, was the seat of the king, and it talks about her princes have become like deer. Imagine putting your faith and trust in whoever your leaders are, whether that's the leaders here of this congregation or the leaders of maybe this state or this country, and seeing those leaders fleeing, running away. It's like those were the guys who were supposed to have a plan. Those are the guys who were supposed to take care of us. And it says, her princes have become like deer, verse 6. They have found no pasture, and they have fled without strength before the pursuer. So imagine seeing your prince or your king just running away. And that's exactly what they saw with Zedekiah. He runs, tries to save his own skin, and they catch him, take him to Nebuchadnezzar, and they kill his sons and put out his eyes. And so it would have just been this despair, this weeping. Verse 16, for these things I weep, my eyes run down with water, because far from me is a comforter, one who restores my soul. My children are desolate, because the enemy has prevailed. Such a sad situation. They cry out to God. They want his help. Notice over in chapter 2 and verse 20, it says, "See, O Lord, and look, with whom have you dealt thus? Should women eat their offspring? Should the little ones who were born healthy? Should priest and prophet be slain in the sanctuary of the Lord?" No, of course, he didn't want any of these things for them. And yet this is what is coming upon them because of what they had done, not serving him, being so faithless. Does the Lord see these things? Do they have to ask him to look? Of course he sees. And yet there's a remembrance of the Lord's faithfulness. One of the most well-known texts in Lamentations over in chapter 3, verses 19 through 26 or so, it says, "Remember my affliction and my wandering, the wormwood and bitterness. Surely my soul remembers and is bowed down within me. This I recall to my mind, therefore I have hope. The Lord's loving kindnesses indeed never cease, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul, therefore I have hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him. To the person who seeks him, it is good that he waits silently for the salvation of the Lord." Which prophet does that remind you of that we just recently studied? We had a very similar thought expressed in one of the short minor prophets. Habakkuk, that's right. Habakkuk, who saw that there would be no figs on the tree, there would be no cattle in the stalls, and he still said, I must wait silently for the day of distress. So he's thinking about it in advance. He knows this is coming. He's dreading it. And here you have now the aftermath where it has happened. The city has burned. They're being carried out. And he still, here being written here by the prophet Jeremiah, sees that the Lord is faithful. How can a person say that the Lord is faithful when they've lost literally everything? How can you? Shannon?
It's a lot of contemplating, a lot of thinking beforehand before you do something, before you speak, but you're live. And there's a lot of lessons there, but it's for us, God speaking to us through his word, and we just have to see that and hear that and think that.
Yeah. It's a very faithful understanding of God and getting outside of the terrible moment that you're in. And you're right, it takes a lot of thought beforehand to have this kind of faith when the calamity comes. Norm?
God described the calamity in great detail when he described the great blessings in great detail. And so now that you're seeing both sides, I said I would do this, here it is. But then he also told them, if you turn back to me, guess what will happen?
That's
and
right.
so you've seen the good, you know about the good, that was written for you in the past. Now you've done evil and you see the evil and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, he is faithful. So if he did the good when we were good and he's done the bad now that we're bad, and I can look and see word for word what's happening, then I know that part at the very end of that bad, if I turn back at some point, he will relent and I'll receive the blessings again.
Yeah. It should build our trust in God because he does what he says. Clarissa?
We're fortunate in our time because we have the complete word revealed to us, so we see it over and over again, which is why obviously we go through the Bible, with Job and with the Israelite nation, with the things that we'll go over in Daniel with what they're going to go through during that period of silence. There's all kinds of things that those that follow God will go through and have endured over time, and we see that if you remain faithful, and it may even be faithful until death, but we have the full revealed word through Revelation that shows that we'll have victory in the end.
Yeah, it reminds me of Hebrews 12, after the Hall of Fame of faithful men, and it says, therefore, having such a cloud of witnesses, we run our race, fixing our eyes on Jesus. And so, these men of whom the world was not worthy, overcame so much. Can we not do the same? That's great. That's a great perspective. All right, any other thoughts or comments on Lamentations? I wish we could spend more time there. But let's flip over to Daniel. And Daniel brings us into the period of the captivity directly, where he, and as we see right there, and we looked last week about those first 7 verses and how this is the best account we have in the scriptures of the first deportation. The first time that Nebuchadnezzar arrived at Babylon and besieged it, and takes some of these most valuable, intelligent, handsome young men over to Babylon. And we talked about how that might have felt and how much faith it would require for them to go now over into Babylon. And yet, they're not in a terrible situation, are they? What are they there to do? Dad?
Well, they've been told to, build houses and plant gardens, plant your fields, live your life, basically, the best way you can. So they're not under stress or persecution, I guess, all the time, but.
That's true, and that's the answer, I think, for the broader group of exiles. And as those young men leave in that first deportation, probably would have had that instruction on their minds if they'd been listening faithfully to the prophets. And so maybe there is, that should fill them with some sort of optimism, like, let's make the most of this. And then they specifically are being put into a pretty prestigious program, are they not? It's like being selected for, executive training at work or something like that. They're being put into the king's, to be trained to serve in the king's court. So that's a pretty special place to be. So since we only have a couple of weeks to look at this great book, I've summarized it as best I can. The first question has 5 parts, but I'm thinking about chapters 1, 2, 3, and 6 together because these are some of the greatest stories of faithfulness in all of our Bibles. And you've got these episodes of Daniel and his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who are enduring some level of persecution, right? So even though it's not like the taskmasters in Egypt, just whipping the Israelites, they're being pressured to assimilate into a heathen nation. And so that first test that we've spoken of, I think, pretty frequently here, both in Jesse's lessons and in our class here, that first test in chapter 1 is one of food and drink. And so what's the trial for a Jew when he's being told to eat from the king's table?
He wasn't going to defile himself.
He wasn't going to defile himself. So we're not told precisely what the issue was with the food, but what might you assume they would run into? Dad?
Some of the things that they consider unclean, like pork and other things that were forbidden by the law.
Yeah, unclean meats, that's right. What else? What was prevalent and common in these heathen nations?
Wine.
The wine, certainly there was concern about these fortified wines that they had been warned against. Don't forget the idolatry that's going on in these nations, right? Meat sacrificed to idols isn't just a New Testament issue, but for them to, have a great feast, the king's going to celebrate a feast to Marduk or to Nebo or to Bel and these great gods of the Babylonians, and then let's eat after sacrificing to these idols. That would have brought them into fellowship with those idols in a way that the Jew was supposed to keep himself separated. And so he chooses, they say, give us just vegetables and water. It was a test. It was a challenge. So I asked you a question, and there's lots of things we could talk about here, but why would Daniel take a stand against something as minor as food and drink? And we've talked about some of those details, but how would you respond to that question?
Wouldn't defile himself.
Okay, he doesn't want to defile himself. That's verse 8. It's a great place, great text to underline that Daniel, New American Standard says, made up his mind that he would not defile himself. Clarissa and then Randy?
Just, obviously this is, you label it as minor, but like if you give in here and then 5 years later you're still in the country and you kind of feel like, well, this isn't that big of a deal, but I'm still remaining faithful, it's just going to erode over time. So he determined from the get-go of his captivity that he was going to remain faithful to God. And that included resisting all forms of assimilation or giving in here so I can lay low to still remain faithful in other ways.
Yeah. Randy?
She covered.
About the same idea? So I put minor in quotes there because it might be perceived as minor, but it wasn't minor. It was the law, first of all. They needed to obey the law for the Jews. But it's also important, like Clarissa said, not to make a small compromise right out of the gate, right? Or what might be perceived as a small compromise, because that leads to greater and greater compromise. And so this resolve, we sing, I am resolved, no longer to linger. And that's the idea here, that he made up his mind, he resolved to serve God faithfully, whatever that looks like. Didn't know what trials were going to come upon him, but he's ready to serve. And so faithfulness, is like a muscle that we build by exercising it over our lifetime. And as a young person, we face a trial or face a temptation. If we give in, well, then we head down this path of, I'm just going to continue yielding as different trials come. If we stand and face the persecution that comes from standing for what's right, we get stronger. And you certainly see a pattern of strength that began right here. Sam?
I was going to say, it's interesting that you also see an example later. You brought up chapters 2 and 6, or 3 and 6 rather, where there's a point where each of the 4 are then threatened with their lives at some point, and
Right.
they still remain faithful in that way. And it reminds me of the parable of the talents, where it's saying that he who is faithful with little is faithful with much. Like, I know it's little, quote unquote, but like it's still, like, you see the progression of their resistance to temptation in that way.
That's right. Yeah, so that's that first trial, and does God carry them through? He certainly does. They're fatter than the other boys, and that was a good thing, right? If you've been in a siege for a couple years, the king doesn't want to see you like that in the king's court. They need to fatten you back up, right? Probably skin and bones at this point. And so God obviously blesses them, not only with physical health, because they're faithful to him, but he blesses them with, as they're tested, they're the ones who are found to have the most wisdom and understanding. It says, verse 20, 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in all his realm. And it mentions there that Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. So this is kind of setting up the rest of the book of how he's going to be serving in the king's court for his entire lifetime for these 70 years in Babylon. So question 2, moving over into chapter 2, and we'll talk about a few things from chapter 2, but first, thinking about the faithfulness of Daniel and his friends. Here, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream and poses a challenge to his magicians and conjurers and sorcerers, which includes now Daniel and his friends. And what's that challenge that he expects from his people?
Well, from his wise men, magicians, and astrologers, he expects them to not only give the interpretation of the dream he had, but to give the dream as well, reveal the dream and what does it mean.
Yeah.
Which would, I think, be somewhat unheard of. And the fact they bring that up, no king's asked that. Just tell us your dream, we'll give you the interpretation.
Can you interpret my dream from last night?
I can't tell you the dream more. Or if you tell me
Your
dream,
first
I'll tell you.
question would be, what did you dream? And so, the challenge there is significant, and it's considered unreasonable, right, But you can see why the king might do such a thing, because it's a test of, do you have any power at all? Do you have any knowledge? Do you have any connection to the gods who can reveal such things? From his perspective, thinking of gods. And so it's a pretty good test. And it exposes, and you see all the way through here this theme starting to develop of God's superiority to any other god. And how Daniel, of course, is the only one who can do what Nebuchadnezzar is challenging the people to do. So why does Daniel tell his friends about this calamity? So Nebuchadnezzar gets mad when they won't do it, and he says, just kill them all. Kill all these magicians, conjurers, because clearly they have no power. So why does he go and tell his friends about it?
Well, the first day back before all this happened, he called his friends and asked them to pray.
That's right.
To protect.
Well, it's not so much before. This is, he finds out what's going on. This has been happening kind of outside his knowledge. Verses 14, 15, and 16, Daniel is asking, why is this decree coming down? And finds out that, I've been told to kill all of you. This Arioch, captain of the king's bodyguard, has come to kill them all. And so Daniel asks for more time, and so that he can actually provide what the king wants. He kind of puts a stay of execution, and then he talks to his three friends, and it's so that they can pray, right? Notice verse 18. Verse 17, he informs his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, those are the Hebrew names, about the matter so that they might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. How does that example instruct us in terms of how to be faithful to God?
When we're faced with temptation, we should pray.
We should pray. And not only we should pray, but we should seek the prayers of others. Yeah, there's a brotherhood and a fellowship here with these three other faithful young men. And we don't know if any of the other exiles from Judah were being faithful at all. It seems like they aren't. I mean, it shows up even more in chapter 3, where there's nobody else there who's not bowing down to Nebuchadnezzar's idol. Just Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and we don't know where Daniel was on that episode. He must not have been present, because we don't think that he'd be one who would be bowing down. And so, there's just a few. And that's such a valuable thing to have a friend who sticks closer than a brother, like we see over in Proverbs. And these are those who are faithful to God, who can help us through our trials. And so then in chapter 3, we alluded to the next episode where, of course, chapter 2, Daniel interprets his dream, and the king is amazed. He learns something about God. We'll come back to that kind of arc in Nebuchadnezzar's life. But he doesn't seem to learn a whole lot, because even though he dreamed about this statue, now he's building a statue for himself and wants everybody to worship this statue. And so we have the chapter 3 story of this fiery furnace, where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are the only three who do not bow down when the whole group, the whole gathering, is told to bow. And that makes them stick out like a sore thumb, and they're brought promptly up to the king so that they can be thrown into this fiery furnace that he's promised. And such an amazing story of their faith. I asked you a simple question here. How did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego avoid putting God to the test when they were facing the fiery furnace? Shirley?
Well, they said that God could be able to deliver them, but even if God decided not to, that they would not still bow down to him.
Isn't that fantastic, the way they say that? If you're looking at chapter 3, verses 17 and 18, that's their statement before the king. And I like the way Shirley put that, even that he could. that God could deliver them. It says, verse 17, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire. And we can say that same thing about any trial we face. God is able to cure me of cancer. God is able to carry me through this trial of a lost loved one. God is able to keep me safe while I'm traveling or whatever the problem is in my life. He's able. But we should also say, like they do in verse 18, but even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So what might be, if we were tempted perhaps to put God to the test, what might be the way that was expressed? What's the test that we might actually accidentally set up for God with a bad heart?
If you do this for me, then I'll believe.
Yeah.
Believe you.
Yeah, we've seen that from a few through history, right? Where Jacob kind of had that attitude, if you will protect me on this journey and bring me back to my homeland, then you'll be my God. Not a very strong statement of faith. This is one of the strongest we find in Scripture, where it doesn't matter if you do what you're able to do. I don't deserve your mercy, God. I don't deserve for you to just jump when I say jump or do whatever I command. You're God. And if your plan is that I go into this fiery furnace and die, then so be it. I'm still going to serve you because you are God. What a faithful attitude. And then over in chapter 6, we have the story of Daniel in the lion's den. And Daniel is thrown into the lion's den because of a government decree. A decree that, similar to chapter 3, where the government is telling them they have to bow down. Here, the government is telling them they cannot pray to anybody but to the king for a month's time. And so I wanted you to think about the mindset here. How might Daniel have rationalized complying with the government? Because I think a lot of times when we're tested, our minds immediately go into, well, how can I avoid the consequences of this test? Is there a loophole, a way around, so that I don't really have to endure? Dad?
Several ways he could have rationalized this. He could have said to himself, well, I need to obey the government. These governments are established by God, so I'm supposed to do what they say. Or he could have said, I could just avoid praying to God in my window for 30 days, I could still pray secretly, without opening my window, they wouldn't know about it, and he could rationalize that way. There's other ways too, of course.
Those are some good ones. Anybody else?
He could have said, well, it's only temporary, it's only 30 days. Or that he could do a lot of good for his fellow Jews if he stayed in power.
Yeah, that logic comes to mind a lot. My family's depending on me. Daniel's a single man, but when I now start applying this to myself, it's like that creeps into my mind. Maybe I shouldn't put myself in harm's way to help when I see a person who needs help because, well, I've got people counting on me. That's rationalizing away work that needs to be done. But yeah, I like the idea of, well, the government is telling me to, and we're supposed to obey the government, right? Well, or I can do it secretly, right? Did he have to open those windows, right? And he can just visualize Jerusalem from inside his room. Why is it that he opened his windows?
That's what he has always done. Why change it now?
As he always had done. Verse 10, it says, he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. Jesse?
It's
kind of interesting, came to my mind what Jesus would teach later on prayer. And he said, Matthew 6:6, but you, when you pray, go into your room, and when you have shut your door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret reward you openly. Like if that Jesus had taught that, that would be easy to apply at that time. But, you know, Jesus was addressing hypocrites who were doing it in public places to be seen intentionally. Obviously, that wasn't Daniel's motive, and he wasn't going to change his godly habits and routines from the early days. That was just who he was. It was genuine.
Yeah, you don't see Daniel on the street corner doing this, do you? He's in his room, and he's opening his window toward what? Not toward the crowds of Babylon so that they can see him pray, but toward Jerusalem. His heart is simply, I want to pray to God. And by the way, Solomon had when he dedicated the temple, had encouraged and asked God that when our people are in a foreign land and pray toward this place, the place where you've made your name to dwell, hear their prayers. And so he's praying in all faithfulness. And it's an attitude of, if I'm punished for this, then so be it. It's not, well, I just want everybody to see. And he's letting his light shine so everybody knows where his faith is directed. Shannon?
In his heart. And that's, you're not flaunting, you're not showing, you're not presenting, you're not, whatever word.
Yeah.
The purpose in your heart, and that's what matters. He knows and you know.
Right. Yeah, we faced some similar challenges back in 2020, right? Where the government was encouraging us to not assemble for health reasons. And we had to make some difficult decisions on shall we obey God rather than men? I don't think, when we asked the local authorities, are we going to be hauled off to jail if we assemble? The answer was absolutely not. And so we continued to assemble, although for a while it was in our cars through that COVID period. But we never missed a Sunday in gathering together so that we could remember the Lord's death as He's commanded. And so there was a command there that you do this and that you assemble. And we were resolved not to let any government mandate get in the way of that. Who knows what might come next? Who knows what kind of government mandates might come that will conflict with what God has commanded Christians to do? I know many churches who have expressed regret for different decisions, and every church in its full autonomy had the right to make those decisions for what was best for their group. But seeing some of the effects of not meeting for months and months and months on end, because, the government doesn't want us to be together, the effects on the spiritual health of the body are still affecting those groups to this day, and many have fallen away. And it once again, the Lord's wisdom is vindicated, coming together as a family regularly, caring for one another, shepherds overseeing the flock, looking to their spiritual needs, caring about the spiritual needs of each other. That's God's wisdom. And when you say, well, maybe we can do without that for a time, things tend to fall apart. So we should put our trust in God. Do those things that we have been doing previously. And that's a good mindset in terms of a trial as well. I think about, maybe two young people who are dating, and the wisdom that we teach, and I remember being taught myself, is you make some decisions on how you're going to behave when you're with each other in advance, so that later, when you might be in a moment of temptation, you can fall back on those well-reasoned plans that you made with a good spiritual mindset. You don't wait until you're, as some say, in the throes of passion to decide should we or should we not. You make those decisions when you're level-headed before the moments of temptation come. Same for any temptation, whether it's sexual temptation or temptation for drinking or any other things that might allure us. We make those decisions in advance, and then we follow those decisions that we've been resolved to make. So thinking about those 4 stories together, my last question on question 1 was, as we dwell among the nations, how can we endure daily contact with heathen life? Are we not like Daniel in Babylon? I think that we are. We're not in the city of Jerusalem. So what are some ways that we can endure? Maddie, is that your hand, or no, just reaching across? All right, I won't put you on the spot. Any tips, any lessons that you've gleaned from these faithful men on how can we endure so that we aren't assimilated and just become part of Babylon? Clarissa?
Well, we have to purpose in our heart, just like Daniel did, that Shannon pointed out. We've got to stay separate from it and be a light, that good example that's separate from what they're doing. And anyway, we also have to be faithful, tell others about God, either by showing and then also teaching the Word. So no matter what, we have to stay faithful, but if we're showing kindness and love to others, that's another way that we really draw people in. If you're different, but you're also different in a very kind and loving way, that will draw people to God.
Yeah. One detail, I wish we could go through each of these in detail, but you remember Darius, the king, when he has to throw Daniel into the lion's den, did he want to? No, not at all. I'll get you in a minute, Gil. But, he says over in chapter 6, verse 16, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. He's confident in Daniel's God, even though it's not his God, because he sees Daniel's faithfulness to this God and has, I'm sure, heard so much about what his God has done. And so I think about our life here in America. Do our friends and neighbors, would they say the same about us? That this is the God whom we constantly serve? That needs to be something that they see. That we're faithful to our God and we are constant in that. And their confidence and faith in our God will grow. Boy, look how blessed you are. It must be because you constantly serve your God. Gil?
I think that may have been mentioned already, but we need to surround ourselves with faithful brethren on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And then we see that evidence of what Daniel did when he was found out they were getting ready to kill all the wise men. Went to his brethren.
Yeah.
And said, "We need to pray." They had a relationship together, and maybe on a daily basis, but we need to have that as much as possible so that we will support each other in a situation like that.
And let's look at that prayer. Turn over to Daniel chapter 2, right before the bell rings. They prayed to God, verse 18, and then verse 19, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. And we'll pick up here next week, but verses 20 through 23, Daniel then prays a prayer of praise and thanksgiving to God. And there you'll see some of the themes of the book really come out in his prayer. So we'll pick up there with question number 2. We're out of time, so we'll just pick up right there. Question 2 on our Daniel lesson. Thanks, everyone.